Let's quilt the log cabin blocks on this Aviatrix Medallion quilt. There are two types of blocks in this border. One has a solid color on the outside and inside of the block, and the other has a white fabric on the outside and inside of the block. I did one variation on the colored blocks and one variation on the white blocks. I'm doing a combination of straight line quilting and some free motion quilting in these blocks. On these outer colored sections of this block, I am quilting a set of lines down the center of each of these strips that are 1/4 inch apart. In measuring the block, I realized if I quilted each of these lines 1/2 inch from the edge, it gave me the 1/4 inch spacing down the center that I wanted. I think it looks best to start from the outside of the block and do one line of stitching that's 1/2 inch from the outside edge, and then do your next line 1/4 inch from the first line that you created. I'm using this slim ruler from Angela Walters. I used the first set of markings to create a 1/2 inch spacing, and then I just used the edge of my surefoot against my ruler to create 1/4 inch spacing. I'm using a light gray thread here, so I'm clipping my threads and moving to the white portion. I don't want to see that gray thread if I try to stitch in the ditch. I'm quilting some outward facing loops in this white section. For spacing, I'm thinking about doing 2 on 1/2 of the square, 2 on the second half of the square, and then 1 in the corner. The spacing is pretty easy to eyeball. And then you want to aim to have your loop not quite touch the outside edge and not quite touch the bottom, or just touch it without crossing over. Inside this colored square, I am quilting an X shape and echoing the line on either side. I really love the look of this X because it creates a little checkerboard in the center. There are lots of different thread paths you could take here, but I'm going to quilt one diagonal line first and then scoot over and echo it on either side. Then I'll stitch in the ditch and quilt the opposite diagonal line and echo it on either side. This gives me very little backtracking. Now let's quilt the second set of blocks. These are the blocks with the white fabric on the outside and the very inside. This is probably the most challenging part of this quilt, is I'm once again quilting connecting circles like I did on the inside of the butterfly body. I chose to use a light gray thread on this quilt, so you're really going to be able to see these circles. If I were a beginner, I might mark 1 inch spacing for these circles. That would help me keep them all consistently in the same size. Here I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I'm getting 6 on each side and 1 in the corner. One of the biggest mistakes you can make when quilting these connecting circles is to let your hands fight against each other. So really concentrate on using one hand and just supporting with the second hand. You can also think about quilting from your heels or quilting from your core here. This is going to give you a smoother curve. Honestly, I could program the computer on my machine to quilt these out perfectly, but I like the imperfection and the hand-guided look to it. The nice thing about this block design is that I can just stitch in the ditch over to the next section. Here I'm going to quilt some straight lines again like I did in the first block. This time I'm quilting them 1/4 inch away from the seam. That means I'll use the edge of my quilting foot to create the correct 1/4 inch spacing. On the inside square of this block, I'm going to quilt some continuous curves. If I'm quilting a little while, these are pretty easy to free motion. And for this block, I echoed each of the curves 1 time. Now I'm going to finish off the straight line quilting in the colored section of this block. Remember, I'm doing these 1/4 inch from the outside edges. That means I'm going to use the edge of my surefoot to give me the correct spacing. I love the combo of free motion and straight line quilting in these blocks. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and check out the other videos in this playlist.